Hey, everybody. All right, on today's show, in a world where the line between imagination and reality is blurring faster than ever, what's left to invent, to earn, to protect? What becomes priceless? So, NVIDIA has shown off new AI tools that can generate detailed 3D models and virtual objects from just a few words or images, talking furniture, fashion, even food, ready for simulation, design, or potentially 3D printing. It's not quite a replicator yet, but the gap between what we imagine and what we create is getting very, very thin. And in the speed of AI, who knows when that next piece will fall into place? So, what happens when I want that becomes I can make that almost instantly? So we're talking replicators, AI, and the future of creativity and abundance. All right, Junmi, let's get started with where are we and what's the difference between it's a tiny gap, but it's also a significant gap, right? Like between being able to imagine something and then have it replicated, or being able to see something and have it duplicated and usable right out the gate.
Yeah. So where we're at now, uh, and I would start with 3D printing, like you said. 3D printing is essentially the closest we've come from a materials sense of a replicator, because we can imagine a pattern. We've got our pattern. We, our 3D object, and we pop it into our printers, and the printers take their time and they print everything out. Now, there's a couple of different types of 3D printers, and we'll go into that a little later. But the main concept is that we're able to take our plans and then create a physical object out of it, right? Now, our current limitations are in the quality and the materials of what we can create, right? As if you've taken a look at the latest 3D printer technology, uh, it has progressed. From the materials side of things, it has progressed a vast amount, right? It started with standard ABS plastic, and now you can do things with resin. There is some reverse 3D printing things now, which are more sculpting than printing out of a certain type of material, right? And it'll cut away what it's looking for, or what your plans are. So there's a bunch of different ways to approach this, but just in the 3D printing sphere, it is just the manifestation of what your plan is into material objects. They even have 3D printers that are starting to work in the edible realm, like chocolate. You can print with chocolate, right?
Right.
And it's no longer a matter of scale either, because there's 3D printed houses, full size houses now,
Yes,
right?
concrete 3D printing is
Printing.
fascinating.
It is, and it fixes and reduces a lot of the current issues with house production, right? It's um, number one, you can use more uniform materials, things that can be costs that can be brought down through scaling, volume, all those kinds of things. The how quick a house could be built with
Right.
this technology, things like that. So your house can go up in a week instead of months, depending on the size of the project. Um, and there is plenty of evidence that shows that over time, it's uh, it functions better. It has better capabilities. Um, and one of the big detractors people think about it is that, oh well, it's be hard to modify, and that's actually not really the case. It's a change in modification. So if you want to extend it, you literally build more walls, and then you break down you break down any old walls that you don't want.
Which is old-fashioned extension, right? You build your house, and then grandpa needs a new wing.
You know,
You
and
do put
because
a door in, like, you cut a
yeah,
hole in the wall.
exactly. So you can do all of these things. It's just a little counterintuitive if you've built homes in the traditional fashion, right?
Right.
It's like, oh well, this is a permanent wall. It's like, permanent in the sense of I can take it down and build it back up again, right? And there's because it's a new process. That whole construction set, you do need to learn different skills. So while a lot of the knowledge and experience may cross over, it is something new. So whether we see it rapidly adopted, that's still up in the air, mainly because it does require some upskilling to change entire processes. You're not doing the same thing anymore, right?
Right. But the
Um,
upskilling is, um right, the upskilling is in the design phase and then in the operation phase, but you don't need as many skilled people maybe because
oh,
the
that's
building is
true.
being done by I mean, I wanna
Yeah,
say by the printer, but it's like a giant crane thing or
yeah.
something.
You definitely don't need as many people because you just need to operate the machine, and you can work in some parallel with some of the processes and things like that. So
Right.
it's
And
not a perfect replacement technology, but it certainly makes it a lot easier, and the big benefit is quicker.
right.
It's far quicker.
And I think what I was thinking of was because these are, we're moving into machine based technology, not necessarily machine learning technology, what we're talking about right now, but machine based. This is a scenario in which an upgrade can be like a software upgrade. Your technology is now smarter. Your person needs to still know how to use it, but you can actually update skills relatively quickly. I'm thinking more than you can update skills for an individual contractor's team, right? Who would need to
Yeah,
learn
for
that.
sure. It's not going to be the same thing as like, oh, I worked on framing and I'm in carpentry, and then now I want to be an electrician. It's it's not that kind of crossover for sure. Now, I imagine in a few years that what we'll see is even more streamlining and even more prefabrication or fabrication on demand, right? What I've been seeing a lot in my feed lately is quickly made prefab homes or pod homes
Mm-hmm.
that are then they're put together. They have everything already encompassed and then shipped off, and they're all relatively inexpensive. And these are essentially the size of a small studio. Those kinds of things. Now, in this kind of technology, I foresee, a big flatbed pulling up, a crane moving the machine into place, and then it printing in the entire home uh, from scratch. But that might be a few years down the line. Now, so that's just one application of scale in the advancement of 3D printers. So as we follow the path of 3D printing, it whether you want it on that large scales like building home or on the more macro scale or micro scale, is uh, it's the ability of freedom and versatility and creativity that allows you to, what this technology does is it allows you to build your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having to buy components from all over the place and either putting it together or just buying a product, a whole hog, so to speak, from a company, you can build the components yourself. And this
Right.
cuts down on a lot of costs and whatnot. Not to say that if you want to get into 3D printing, there isn't a learning curve. There's definitely a learning curve as part of that process, and some investment. But we are seeing more and more 3D printing houses or 3D printing farms where people are just buying multiple printers to create different components or different items or products, and it's fairly on demand, so you don't have to keep stock or invest in a very large supply chain.
Right.
This is all to say,
Sell
right?
before you sell before
It's
you
before
print,
you,
right?
right, exactly, right. It's just like it's print on the demand, but you know, on for 3D printing instead of like publishing or whatnot. But this all comes back to the concept of the replicator, right? So when we talk about replicator, right now we're talking about Star Trek replicators. This is the technology that allows finite or near infinite control and versatility of matter and energy. So it'll allow us to the technology allows us to apply to every material sense, so that we can, you know, if we need that data pad or we need a napkin or a fork or a plate or food is the main one. It's the food part, right? You can take matter, combine it with energy and the technology, mush it together, and then get the thing that you want. The bowl of ice cream, the Earl Grey tea, hot, you know, those kinds of examples. Now, in non-specific sci-fi terms, this is also known as a nanofabricator, right? We need to be
Okay.
able to control molecules, right? So at the nano level, and it's a fabricator, it's a fabrication machine. It takes molecules, rearranges them, and puts them into the structures that allow us to make the thing that we want. So nanofabricator, and using the 3D printer analogy, is just a very fancy, highly evolved version of this. Now, this solves a bunch of things for us, right? And this is where the abundance and scarcity question comes up. If you can control down to the molecular level, and we're not even talking about at the atomic level, just the molecular level, that means you can rearrange pretty much anything in nature to your needs, right? Let's say you have a bunch of sand, but what you need is a glass of water, right? So you can take all of that, rearrange the molecules, and use the nanofabricators and form the glass of water that you need. So that's the magic of it, so to speak.
All right. So is sand a universal uh cell structure? Like can we make everything out of sand? I know we can make glass out of sand. Are
Well,
there
no, with the nanofabricator, it doesn't matter what the material is. It
mm,
rearranges and changes the molecules into another material.
so the molecules are the core building blocks and there's enough continuity between is that what it is? Sorry. I did not take physics. So whatever
Well,
the class is that would answer this
all right.
question,
So
I am not at
if
it.
you go down to think of it like the periodic table. All right.
Yes. Okay.
So the technology is if it's developed enough, you can literally change one element into another element. The
Oh,
only difference is essentially the um, changing the number of neutrons, protons, and electrons. That combination is what makes one element different from another element, in broad terms.
okay.
You know, there's positive, negative charge, all these other kind of stuff. You know, free ions, yada yada yada. But essentially, that's what the changes at the
Okay.
atomic level. Now, the nanofabricators, depending on what interpretation in sci-fi you want, like Star Trek is the nanofabricator that works on the atomic level, right? It'll literally change one element into another. Now, there are other examples of nanofabricators that we may be much closer to, is that changes it on the molecular level, meaning if you want a glass of water, you could put a handful of sand in there and you can rearrange the sand to get the glass, you know,
Mhm.
and it can grab oxygen and hydrogen from the atmosphere, the air,
Mhm.
and recombine them in such a way for the water. So as long as you have access to the base materials that are around,
Okay.
then those molecules can be rearranged as needed. So there's a couple of interpretations there, but essentially changing matter into another form of matter.
So that is fascinating because I was thinking that what we haven't solved is what I think of as the Frankenstein component, which is to take dead matter and make it live matter. But if we're talking about the fundamental elements, maybe that's built in. Is all matter
So are you saying for
whole?
the Frankenstein thing? Are you saying we take a hamster? Are you saying take a dead hamster and turn it into a live hamster?
No, I'm saying take parts. So, let's say that it's not a glass of water, but it is a salad.
Uh huh.
That those leaves have life in them, right? It is still a form of life to a certain extent, and it
Okay, you're
was
saying
alive.
you basically you're saying organic and inorganic matter,
Yes,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Ah, it
So if
goes
you
back to the classes I did not take.
so so unless it's in through the active process of being alive, inorganic or organic matter is inert, right?
Okay,
Whether you're eating a salad or you're eating a steak or anything like that, it's dead. It's not alive because this is just the residual material after the life is gone, for lack of a better term, right?
okay,
And that is that in within the realm of this concept, that's an easy transition, right? Because it's just one type of matter into another. Organic cells are a combination of like cellulose and the different kinds of cells that you're creating, whether it be heme or blood or fat cells or all of those kinds of things. They're just a different combination of elements to form that, right? When we talk about ourselves as carbon-based life forms, that's the basis of our cells, and cells are actually bigger than our molecules. So if we're if we're going from cell size down to molecules down to atomic structure, and we have the ability to control matter down to those levels, then that gives us greater and greater control of what we want to see in the end.
and that is, oh, we have achieved that at energetic and defense levels, right? So the atomic bomb was at the atomic level. Yes.
Oh, so yeah, so a nuclear weapon is basically it's a fission bomb, right? So it's
Right.
that process of splitting those atoms, and when splitting those particular atoms or that particular element, like plutonium, right, it expels lots of energy. So do that to a lot of atoms, and you get a lot of energy, right?
Okay.
So think of that kind of implementation as part one, right?
Okay.
So if it's just a matter of splitting the atoms into its component into other component parts, then um, then that would be one part of the process, right? So now when we think about replicators and things like that, we don't think about it as creating fission or using fissionable material. We already go beyond that part and talk about the manipulation. So for in Star Trek, it's the manipulation of the atomic element itself. So
Okay.
it's no longer splitting plutonium atoms or uranium atoms from each other, releasing the energy. It's literally changing the number of protons and neutrons or electrons to change the plutonium into a completely different thing. So
Right.
that's the difference between it. So we don't need to split the plutonium or uranium. We
Okay.
just need to make it not plutonium or uranium.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to bring one other thing in and then we can go more toward like the post scarcity economy, which I know is a big part of this conversation too. Um, but there was a story very recently where people successfully changed lead into gold. So like alchemy was achieved. Now,
Right.
the value of the process was not equal to the value of the gold.
Right.
So
Right.
it was not really all that helpful, but it was like we have achieved the ability to do what alchemists have always dreamt of.
Right. I totally read that story too, and it's closer to fusion,
Okay.
the fusion process, right? So they literally shot a lead atom or a bunch of lead atoms as fast as they could, and when it glanced off of, I forget what the other materials were, those atoms then reformed in a way that gold was produced. So not exactly what we're talking about for replication, but it is closer along those lines. Um, I guess there's just a couple of different ways that we want to really look at this, and I like the 3D printer analogy and path a little better in terms of what the result is, right?
Mhm.
It's less important what the scientific process of what the replicator is going to do,
Mhm.
and more about the result, right?
Right.
And besides, it's science fiction, so we're going to hand wave a lot of things and other principles that I'm sure if any scientist watches this is going to go, but you didn't talk about this or that or these hurdles. Yes, there's a lot of hurdles, but the idea of the concept of being able to take matter that we don't necessarily have a use for, or we can't um, use in the same ways, or we have higher priorities, and changing that into something that we do have a higher priority for is the important part, right?
Mhm.
Because the concept of the nanofabricator is it's beyond just providing things in terms of scarcity, but it's also it provides a level of freedom from our current systems, right?
Right.
Right now we have a scarcity system. We have finite amount of land that can grow finite amount of food, and we have a finite amount of environment to support us as human beings continually growing and expanding and things like that. And so how can we use materials more efficiently? Well, what's great about the nanofabricator or replicator technology concept is it can make everything that we need from stuff that we don't need. It is perfect recycling.
Mm.
It's perfect materials creation,
Right.
and it's freeing in the sense that it's equalizing, because all you need to do is make one and it can make another, and then those two can make more, and those four can make more, and eventually you can make enough for everybody, so people don't have to worry about the availability of resources, uh,
Mhm.
and those kinds of things, because everyone can have one. And that was kind of one of the more utopian ideals that came out of Star Trek, is beyond let's help everybody each other out, but with the development of that technology, it was it was easier transition, because there's only so many 100-foot yachts that someone would want, right? So after a couple generations, it's like, yeah, I can have whatever I want at any time. I don't need to accumulate stuff. I can have the
Right.
thing that I need when I need it. And then to get rid of it, I simply chuck it back into the device and it turns it into something else.
Right.
So it's sort of this perfect recycling of materials as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, we're like uh, uh like, do hoarders now become the most wealthy people? Right up there with your millionaires and billionaires, right?
Well,
Um,
it becomes less of an issue because if you're not fighting for resources, you don't need resources anymore.
right.
Wealth doesn't really matter.
No, I'm just thinking in that transition of like, what are your central components? So, um, part of what I'm curious about in this is that and what you've just alluded to is then what has value. And does sci-fi tell us anything about the transition in the between the scarcity model and like now we have abundance? I'm assuming that little bridge there is complex.
Right, right. Well, okay. So there's a couple different takes. Um, it's such a redefining moment for humanity
Right.
once you have you no longer have any form of scarcity, right? You have created a technology that you really don't have any form of scarcity. Now, we haven't talked about the energy component as of yet, but there's sci-fi examples of that too. But for in the broad strokes, if our current humanity were suddenly everyone were to be empowered by this all at the exact same time, there would
Oh,
be some conflict. Um, Mainly because those who had a bunch of power no longer have it. Um,
yeah.
and those who, and there are um, a couple of famous things. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the majority of the time and energy that someone with power spends is on maintaining or growing that power.
Right.
So it would it would force a radical shift in our thinking process and our society and those kinds of things. So in science fiction, we have heard lots of tales of technology being suppressed,
Right.
um, right? It's too powerful or too chaotic or too damaging to allow the public access to this. I mean, it could be from something as innocent and makes kind of sense in Indiana Jones, right?
Mhm.
We don't want we don't want the Ark of the Covenant walking around melting people's faces on the street corner.
That's a
Uh,
reasonable position.
Right, right. So we crate it up and we put it in a warehouse being studied by top men, right? Ending scene. Um, but but on the other side, we sometimes get this the idea or the story and conspiracy theory of the water-based engine,
Mhm.
right? Um, I'm sure if someone was introducing a an engine like an automobile engine that just ran off of water, like you just pour in a liter of water and it ran for nearly forever. Uh, people who were people who had an invested interest in not water-based products for engines or non-water-based engines would have an issue with that. And so there's
Right.
lots of stories and theories and around that. So we see lots of that in sci-fi. The other way I've seen it, and particularly in Star Trek, they had World War III.
Right.
Whole big percentage of human beings died, and those who were left going, "Whoa, that was bad. What caused that? Oh,
Right.
this. Let's not do that anymore." Right.
Right.
So it was that entire global shock to our system that forced the change in humanity, and that still happened over like 200 years or 150 years or something in
Mm.
the Star Trek timeline or canon. And so that is those are the kinds of stories that you get. Um, so I mean, if you ask on what's the best way to do it, is either we find we find the chaotic transition acceptable and the fallout
Mhm.
from that, and we may be required for that, or we may need something that is so impactful of an event to us that we that we are forced to make the change. The slow periodic change, whilst possible, has a much, or at least based on the stories, has um, a much less of a time or percentage chance of succeeding
Right.
than these smack you in the face type of events.
Right. Well, there is something to having been alive, have lived experience of one circumstance that no longer exists for the people who were born after, right? I find this conversation when I'm talking to young people about privacy, digital privacy, right? Like they're people who are growing up, at least in the U.S. today, and I think in developed countries, don't know of a time when your picture could be taken by literally anyone and
Yeah.
communicated digitally to the world in a second. So there is not that expectation of privacy, right? When I was growing up, it was actual film. Somebody had to develop it in order for it to become a picture and then put in things when it was going to be distributed. And that's just a real like generational like, hey, there's something called privacy, and like, yeah, and I'd never met her. Like, what's that like?
I mean, I've had that exact experience. So in the group of filmmakers and independent filmmakers that that I associated with, is they're all young, way younger than I am, right? And so when we would talk about stuff, and talking from that friend group, it's they give me a hard time because they said, "Oh, Jimmy, you sound like a conspiracy theorist," because I'll go off about the privacy part. And until one day, one of them just told me, it's like, "I think what the issue is you grew up with it and we grew up without it,
Right.
right? We never had privacy, so we're perfectly fine. We're doing it a bunch of these ways, where I grew up with privacy, so I know that it's important to protect it, just like protecting your data and all those kinds of things." And when they told me that, that was that one of those light bulb moments. It's like, oh yeah. And then I started to feel sorry. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. You don't understand having that freedom. You never grew up with that kind of freedom. Privacy is part of having freedom, and if you don't have privacy, you can't truly be a free person. So yeah.
Well, I'm thinking, right? Like, what is the saying? Dance like nobody's watching is one of them, right?
Mm,
That was a thing because there was a play like dance like nobody's watching was not just in your closet at home, right? Like dance like nobody's watching um is familiar enough because there are way fewer options right now to
mhm,
dance while nobody's watching
yeah.
than there were before. All right. Well, this is totally making me think. The other thing that I was thinking when you were talking was the idea of um, uh, matter. Nothing is created and nothing is right. But matter just changes form. Is that
Right.
true? Right.
Yeah.
So nothing is created or destroyed. Matter just changes form,
Yeah.
and yet our experiences are of things being um, like turned into waste or like we were talking on the Daily AI show today about how much more efficient produce grown indoors in like vertical gardens can be. And part of that is because nothing gets evaporated. The water doesn't get evaporated in
Mhm,
that scenario
yeah.
because it's not outside. I'm not saying those are also classes I did not take. So I'm not saying that that's like it's better
Right.
inside than what it would get
Yeah.
outside, but also all those things, right? But
Yeah. And you know, I know in the show we definitely highlighted the advancements and the positives, right? With any technology that's being implemented, there are definitely going to be negatives, and there are a few when it comes to that. I think the things that we were highlighting were the importance of having a more sustainable supply chain for our for our food production,
Right.
right? And that's one of the things that is a scarcity issue, and the fact that our systems are so hyper designed and performance based, or at least what we consider a high priority of performance, or
Mhm.
how that looks, um, that if there's any changes in that single strand, we everything falls apart, right?
Right.
So that's being discussed as a separate thing. Now, how that wraps around to replication and replicators and those kinds of things is these nanofabricators, these replicators provide a decentralized method of distribution of material, right?
Mm.
So as long as everyone has a replicator, and we could see this, growing in scale too. There could be the it could be big until it's personalized. So it
Right.
could be, instead of the local grocery store one every mile or one every 5 miles,
Right.
then you could have the replicator factory, and you just punch in what you want, like the old cafeterias back from the 50s, where you could just say, no, I want the sandwich, beep boop, and then you just pull out your sandwich from the little case or whatever. Old school replicators, right? Just don't look behind the glass. But uh, that's a way of implementation as well. And I'm sure if we're going to do this gradual, release, so to speak, of the technology, that's might be one of the ways that we see it. It's like, oh, well, the technology we have still takes the size of a building,
Right.
or a mini mall. So you just come to the mini mall, get whatever you want, and then go,
Right.
and go along those sides until things become more personal. It'll break down to the size of a house, just like computers, right? They used to be the size of warehouses, and then you could fit them in an office building, then you could fit them on your desktop,
Mhm.
on your desk, and then it's in your lap, and then it's in your hand, and then a chip that you can put in the base of your skull, and or glasses, and it just
Mhm.
gets more miniature and micronized from there. Uh, but the big thing here is that, or the point I'm trying to make is the concept of a decentralized supply chain. So, if you can't get the one that's 1 mile away from you can go to the one that's 2 miles away.
Mhm.
That concept, until everyone has one in their pocket, like a mobile phone.
So does it open up, is there like a viral risk if it's replicate, like if all of them are have the same function? Like is there a challenge in duplicating something that would make them non-functional or uh difficult?
Sure, but not any more than the same kind of risks we have now. In
Okay.
any form of it, every time you update your Windows system or software on your computer, there's a chance that that's tying to a bad package. And we've seen it happen in Windows before, where it's like, oh, upload this latest security update. Okay, I'll update my Windows. Well, nowadays it happens automatically without warning you. But I'll update my Windows. It's like, oh, why doesn't half my software work anymore? Oh, it's not accepting. Why my keyboard doesn't work? Those kinds of things. And then beyond malicious kinds of software like malware, viruses, and those kinds of things, that will always exist.
Okay.
There's always going to be a bad actor who's going to try to force that. Now, the tricky part is in the development of the technology. So I've talked about the gray goo scenario, where that's a concept from sci-fi where nanobots, right? We're talking about the nano size here. Nanobots, their programming goes a little haywire, or someone programs in the wrong parameter, or they get into the paperclip issue
Mhm.
where it's like all we want to do is replicate and eat every other material until it turns into all of us, right?
Mhm.
Now that's a different kind of replicators, and that's from a different sci-fi series, Stargate SG-1. Um, but but that concept is more of the autonomous nature of building this out. Nanofabricators, while they could be built to be more autonomous, where they're accepting commands from an outside source or they're all interlinked with each other, those things could exist, but the nanofabricator technology in and of itself doesn't need any automation other than running its own internal structures, right? But there is a chance that in the development of that technology, when you're saying, hey, change material A into material B, that that part gets messed up and then it
Right.
starts changing all the material into material B, and you have to figure out ways to stop it. And that's why you build in all these safety protocols and things like that. And so uh, and a lot of sci-fi stories will take it from that point. But once we've developed the technology, there's very little chance of that going on without some sort of external factor to force it.
Okay. So it sounds to me like we're like right on the cusp of the part that uh is the pre-story for the for the sci-fi movie. Like, are we going in to the 200-year period during which the transition is shall we say messy? And that is you know, there are plenty of like very knowledgeable sci-fi sorry, very knowledgeable AI minds
Mm-hmm.
who are out there talking about like, hey, just there's when we talk about like what's possible, we have concerns with like everybody else to be at the same knowledge level of what's possible, not how to
Right.
do it, right? Jeffrey Hinton, Ilya, right.
Right. Yeah, it's an analogy I like to think about when it comes to so any form of development is you need to think about each step, right? And so the analogy I use is restaurant cooking. Okay, there is a reason why the stuff you buy at the supermarket and you just whip up some spaghetti for you does not taste as good as if you went to an Italian restaurant and ate their spaghetti, right? It's because at each stage, they're taking extra steps, right?
Right.
Whether that be choosing the right kind of ingredients because they provide the best flavor or particular flavors, the way that they're processed or unprocessed, the way that they're cooked individually. And a lot of it comes down to salt and fat and spices, right? So restaurant food is also far more fattening and flavorful because that's what makes it so good compared to
Mhm.
your home meal, um, because that's the output that they're looking for, right? So knowing when to salt things, when not to salt things, when to add in the spices, what spices are good for cooking in the beginning or aromatics that you add at the end, you know.
Right.
Why does a bolognese taste so good after it's been, stewing on the stove for 12 hours as opposed to, plopping it out of a can, those kinds of things. Adding the red wine at the right time, the cup of pasta, water, all those kinds of things. And so that's what's important when you're developing anything else is being cognizant and paying attention to each layer because at the end it's going to have a dramatic effect
Right.
to what the end product is. So it isn't, and I think this is gonna be tough for the tech world is um, they go so fast because it's go fast, break it, better ask for forgiveness than permission. The caveat to all of that is if you don't pay attention to what you're doing at each stage, you're not going to have an opportunity to ask for forgiveness.
Right. I mean, ask for forgiveness only works for a certain level of something.
Right.
I'm pretty sure when they teach people in the military how to make bombs, that is not part of the process. Go fast, ask for forgiveness after. That is only certain scenarios. Absolutely. And so that brings up like what should be unreplicable. If we have the ability to replicate everything, are some things off limits? And is that just an agreement across communities?
Yeah, I think that's an alignment question, right? Those
Mm.
those kinds of questions of whether we should or shouldn't is more about us than the technology, right?
Ooh, yes.
Because yeah, so it goes back to the concept of you got to fix people first before before trying to fix the technology, because people are we're crazy balls of
Mm,
chaotic, in energy and matter, right? So there's always going to be someone who wants to push the limits. If you
right.
put in guardrails, there will always people who want to jump the rail. There's, and so that's that age old question, and it really comes down to um, getting your alignment as human beings in order.
Hmm.
you know what is your declaration of principles? These
Right.
are the things that we believe in. Yes, we understand that without if we don't take x stance on something, that something bad could happen from it, but we feel that this detracts too much for the thing that we find more important, right? And that's
Right.
like democracy and freedom of speech. you know while I may not like what you are saying, everybody gets to say what they're going to say, right? And those kinds of things. And there's finer nuance of details of how you want to lay all that out. I'm not just trying to broad stroke this here, but that's my example. uh,
Hmm.
you know when it comes to this alignment thing, we kind of have to figure out what we want and what we can all agree to. Now, if you've ever put a group of people together in a room to try to figure out what you what you want to do, that can take some time. So so let's get started now so that we can figure out what we want. And the other thing is, we have to reach a point for some of these technologies. I think we have to reach a point where we're honest with ourselves and we can voice that that honesty, right?
Right.
If a bunch of people are in the room and there's some billionaire moguls out there, we need to be able to be honest enough to say, if I was the billionaire, it's like, I'm only concerned with making more money and I don't care what it matters to anybody else. That's my
Right.
actual. It's like, okay, now are you willing to
Right.
compromise just a little bit for these things that are more of a concern to us? All right, those
Right.
kinds of things, and we need to be able to talk from that point and be open to being able to come together to have a realistic, you know set of principles.
Right.
Now it's always going to be people are on the extreme ends. Yeah, so
So it's
it's
interesting.
difficult. I'm not saying, oh yeah, we'll just put them all in a room and like in 2 months we'll figure it all. No, 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 we've been trying to do that for thousands of years. Well,
Right.
we may need a little more time.
But so much of our current experience is based on a scarcity model,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's fascinating, and I am speaking from raised in America, white, middle class privilege, right? And I am very aware that there are many other traditions, often indigenous, that don't come from that model, right? Everything's owned by everyone. We take care of it. It gives to us. We give back. That's uh, um, yeah, and that's like such a beautiful model, and just not one that is innate to me. But it does strike me that when we're talking about crime, and like things that keep you safe and things you want protected from. An enormous amount of what we talk about of in terms of crime is scarcity based model, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That potentially goes away, right? The carjack maybe
Or
goes away
a
because,
vast majority of it. Yeah.
right? Um, because the baby formula is replicable, right? So
Mhm.
we don't need to raise something to do the baby formula. But then there are things that are harder for us to like track as crime, like um, toxic waste, large amounts of toxic waste being put somewhere that it destroys something. Now, in our all matter is matter, it just changes form. The
Mhm.
destruction of something from toxic waste could also be material to be replicated if this is something that happens. But I think in terms of scale, we have a general sense of like, well, this is a crime because I can see a human victim and I can see the way, or like I could something happen to the car. Like you can see things in a scale that on a human level you can understand. Whereas if you're not seeing like the people who are affected by the toxic spill, because then right we get the movies and the Aaron
Mhm.
Brockovich, okay, now we got it, right? Like
Right.
those things are happening way before that movie and they're continuing to happen, but we had a moment of where we could see it because of that film. Yeah, okay. So what are some final thoughts? We didn't really come up with anything that we shouldn't replicate, but also um
Yeah.
that's not something that we're gonna know right now, right?
Right. Right. I mean, there's easy, you know, uh, concepts that we could say, oh, we don't want you to be able to replicate a weapon, right? Um, but I think what the replicator technology would do is negate a vast amount of the reason to want one,
Right,
right? And that's what you're saying about the crime is scarcity is our biggest issue. People not having anything, trying to survive enough to where they can relax, right?
right,
Stress is the largest killer globally of humanity. It's stress. And if you don't have to worry about your basic needs, right, then
right,
we'll all be better off. Um, and this is one of the arguments that's made now because we're in a near post scarcity scenario now. We have so much abundance. We have the technologies to produce enough to feed the world, clothe the world, shelter the world, provide health care, provide education, all of those kinds of things. But the systems in place and the people in power don't want to spend all of their power, time, money, and energy into doing that. But with this technology, it kind of evens the playing field. Again,
right.
the chaotic turmoil that will happen as soon as it exists. But if we can survive that, then yes, a lot of the reasons for conflict and strife will be mitigated as well. So
So in a post scarcity economy, the only thing that's scarce is power over,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And I think often when we talk about motivations for doing something that feels criminal or cruel or those sorts of things, we mush together. I'm doing this because I have a human need that I need to fulfill, and this is the way that this is the path that makes sense for me to do, or I'm doing this because I have a human need to fulfill that is not actually productive, right? I have a human need for cruelty. I have a human need um, for uh, for whatever else that says, and I recognize that those seem like not human needs, but I was raised by a father who really enjoyed cruelty, so and did not need to. He got a lot of he, he had needs met in a bunch of ways, but that didn't change the fact that he that there was a jonesing for some cruelty that happened on a regular basis. And I don't think that's a unique. I don't think he was the only one. So, but I do think that it will be clearer in a post-scarcity economy where, like, I think those people stand out a little bit more, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, once clear the wheat from the chaff, you're going to understand how much chaff you have, right? so,
Will the chaff please rise and be recognized?
so, so yeah, and I think that will help with clarity as well. Is because overall, it's going to be a positive improvement, right?
Yes.
Doing supporting and doing more for the most people is the general premise of good that we have, right, as a framework. It's like, okay, is this good for everybody? Or great. That's something that we should try to accomplish. So while there definitely be some speed bumps and there will be some transition, growing pains, if you will,
Mhm.
um, you know, those for right now, I see those as, unless they're in the absolute extreme, those are something to be endured for the
Right.
greater result.
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
Right. So is it worth it? Right. And these are like, keep an eye on this, because this is a conversation first about replication technology that we're going to come back to over and over again as technology advances. But the conversation keeps getting more refined in terms of, so these are the exchanges that we're making right now. Right now, we are burning more fossil fuels in pursuit of more AI intelligence so that we can have AI intelligence invent or solve problems so we don't need to burn the fossil fuels. Right? Like that is that is actually an argument that is made by top frontier AI companies.
Mhm.
And that that's just that's part of the equation, right? That's right now, that's part of the equation, and it is part of the is it worth it conversation, right? Those two
Right.
things come up and bump against each other a lot. Hey, couldn't we solve this before we do this thing? Because then that's solved. And then we have
Well,
this thing over here,
well,
and you're going to say we
yeah,
have, right?
that's the funniest thing about that particular example too, is we already have the solution. We have sustainable energy methods, and yes, they are advanced enough to produce all the power that we need. What they are is more expensive. Spend your money, you're going to make more of it on the AI compute side of things anyways. So that's why I would suggest it's like you're going to make more money off of the compute and the AI that's being developed than you are on just spending more for your energy production. Yeah.
All right.
Not to say don't keep developing more efficient or greater energy processes. Keep doing that, but instead of digging another coal mine, um,
Yeah.
you know, geothermal, wind, tidal based, energy production, all of those things that exist. Yeah, it's
Right.
just more expensive, but we have the we have the space and the technology.
Yep. And that's where, that sort of back to a human level perspective. Like, it's more expensive, but aren't you spending trillions now? Like, what is more expensive? More expensive, like, in what context? Let's put these now back in like stacks of Oreos, and we can really talk about what we're talking about. One Oreo equals $10 million, maybe. I don't know. This this was a Ben and Jerry's video a whole while back, I think. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging with us. Jude, Jen, and Gwen holding down the chat. We love to see it. We have more sci-fi AI shows coming up. If you have a topic that you would like to share with us that you want us to do, we would love to hear it. And until then, I think we're out. Yeah, Jimmy?
Aloha.